Since the Magnus Archives will go into the last act of its story after the winter holidays, I thought a short recap was in order before we all learn how our favorite characters are going to die horribly. Since most people with actual jobs don't have the time to re-listen to around 60 hours of audio,
I will explain it to you in under 15 minutes with a crappy micro and a heavy German accent because, shut up, the fandom doesn't have enough videos.
Season 1. Jonathan Sims is the head archivist of the Magnus Archives, an organization where you can go to after you somehow survive the monster living in your desk, or alternatively, you can go there shortly before said monster is going to eat you. Either way, it won't help you in any way to go to the archives, except that you finally found someone you can tell your entire crappy life story to without them being able to run away. These statements get recorded with tape recorders because laptops prefer dying the electronic death to recording this kind of drizzle. John has been employed after the mysterious disappearance of his successor, an older lady called Gertrude Robinson, who took her job about as seriously as most people who are about to retire and left the entire place a mess. To help him sort through it, John has 3 assistants: Martin Blackwood, the sweetheart he hates for no reason, Tim Stoker, the cool and hot one, and Sasha Jones, the person that has the only brain cell left in the archives. His boss is Elias Bouchard, who no one cares about before he turns out to be evil in later seasons. Oh yes, spoilers. John refuses the entire season to admit that any of the stories that are told to him are real and instead explains them mostly by head trauma or the statements giver being insane. But of course he always ends with that one weird detail that clearly isn't a sign for the supernatural, even if there are 100 versions of the same exact decaying tooth in a bag. No supernatural things at all. At around the halfway point of the season, actual plot begins to happen, and Martin turns up in the archives after he had been missing for days and explains he was attacked by one of the evil monsters in the statements, an evil worm lady. John is not an arsehole for once in his life and lets him stay in the archives to keep him safe. Sasha meets a weird guy called Michael, who shows her how to kill worms with a fire extinguisher, which is an amazing skill to have apparently. Since this amazing fighting lesson will surely keep Sasha alive, Michael vanishes again, and John buys a few more fire extinguishers for his workplace. 2 evil Cockney delivery men from one statement bring a table from another statement that is obviously a trap into the archives, and no one does anything. Finally, the evil worm lady appears in the archives. They fight her off, which mostly composes of running and hiding, where John finally explains to Martin that he isn't an oblivious asshole, just an asshole that acts oblivious since he senses something watching him while he's taking the statements. A tactic that works about as well as keeping your eyes closed so that the monsters can't see you. They also find some hidden corridors under the archives before nearly dying of worm-inflicted wounds. They get saved by the boss finally doing anything in the podcast and pulling the fire alarm, so all the worms get killed by the extinguisher foam. Oh, and the table that obviously was a trap. Sasha dies via table-related monsters and get replaced by it. The season ends with a recap of the finale that all of you don't need thanks to this amazing video. But it's also revealed that Martin found Gertrude's body in the hidden corridors down below. So John finally has some job security. Also, obviously even new Sasha is evil. Season 2. John is becoming paranoid about everyone except the obviously evil characters because magic, and so that the listeners wants to bang their heads into a wall after every supplemental recording where he goes on and on about stalking poor Tim and how Martin is definitely evil because he behaves like he has a crush on John. Spoilers, he has a crush on John. John also wanders the hidden corridors they found last season and manages to find exactly nothing. So he's about as productive as always. Since there has been a corpse found with bullet wounds under the archives, the police show up in the form of Basira Hussain. She works for the section part of the police who are basically the Men in Black but less cool. John gets on so well with her that he manages to convince her to smuggle him some old tapes from his predecessor, and also so well that Tim thinks that they are actually banging. An old statement giver called Melanie King appears again and tries to tell people that evil Sasha is obviously evil, but no one listens for her for ages because magic. Finally, John listens to some old tapes with old Sasha's voice on it and believes her story. But since old Sasha had the only working brain cell in the archive, he does the clearly wrong thing of smashing the table that keeps evil Sasha trapped, and he has to flee from the now freed monster. He gets saved by Jürgen Leitner, the most terrible librarian in the world, who tries to give him some exposition, but John chickens out after half of it to get a smoke, and Leitner gets violently murdered by a pipe. Meanwhile, the incredibly useful Michael from Season 1 lets Tim and Martin run around in his maze for a while. End of Season 2. Season 3. John is on the run because he is suspected for Lightner's death, and he hides with the best character of the entire podcast, the Admiral, and its owner, John's ex-girlfriend, Georgie Barker. John, as always, has the best plan of just going up to monster and asking them questions. Astonishingly, most monsters don't react well, and he gets severely hurt several times. At least he learns he now has the superpower to ask super annoying questions and still get answers. He also gets sent statements via postal service, which is clearly suspicious because who uses postal service instead of emails nowadays? Oh, and also because he's in hiding. Apparently there is an evil group called The Stranger that wanted to end the world because of course they do. Meanwhile, Melanie returns and stupidly takes a job that everyone tells her not to take. Then she complains for the rest of the podcast about how terrible the job is that she took. Basira's girlfriend Daisy turns up, who is also part of the Men in Black, and tries to murder John because he has evil question powers. He manages to convince her to let him at least ask Elias some annoying questions beforehand. She brings him into the archives, and Elias tells them about killing both Gertrude and Leitner, but when Daisy tries to kill him for it, he stops her by threatening her girlfriend and forces Basira to take the worst job of all times, with absolutely no dismissive protection and only 2 weeks of vacation time before you literally die. Now that that is cleared up, John can return home, but his ex talks to him beforehand to tell him that she basically saw into Death's eyes and now feels no fear anymore, even at facing a Black Friday crowd in COVID times. There is some arguing about gorilla skin before John gets kidnapped for the first of many times. Mace Michael shows up to kill him, but an inner conflict stops him and he has a sex change, so he's now going under the name of Helen. After becoming a woman, she is in a much better mood and lets him go. Meanwhile, Melanie makes several attempts on Elias' life that go about as well as you expect with an all-seeing being. Finally has enough of her and fries her brain with terrible memories. John gets addicted to statements and travels to the US, not necessarily in this order. With the help of some vampire killers, John manages to find the exposition dump called Jared Key, who tells John all about the evil 14 gods of fear that are ruling the world. The Eye, the Spider, skydiving, cannibalism, darkness, fire, and probably earth, wind, and water too. Oh wait, that was Avatar: The Last Airbender. Finally, the apocalypse ritual of the clown people happens, and everyone goes to stop it except Martin and Melanie. While Melanie sulks, Martin has the most badass conversation with Elias through a door and manages to distract him long enough to get him arrested. Unfortunately, the rest of the squad isn't so fortunate, and they blow themselves up, except Dosia, who somehow reasoned herself out of a literal, magical inflicted madness, and Daisy, who went to sleep in a coffin. Season 4. John doesn't feel very well since being exploded, and he is now in a coma. Elias' evil husband, who wants another divorce, has taken over the archives and is like most bosses, never there when you need him. He is an avatar of the lonely and is also corrupting Martin into loneliness after his terrible mother died, so that they both can stop a supposedly rising 15th god of climate change. Daisy is still playing vampire in a coffin, and Melanie is still blaming everyone around her for her problems, as if not everyone else told her not to join the archives. John gets visited by Death's version of a more competent Sybil Trelawney, Oliver Banks, who tells him that he has to either accept the almighty Sauron Eye or kick the bucket. John thinks fuck that and becomes a shining new symbol for stalkers all around the world. Sadly, everyone around John seems to hate him for no reason, and even after he takes a ghost bullet out of Melanie's leg that basically puts her in a permanent berserker rage, she's still throwing curses at him, so he decides to bring back the hunting chick out of her emo coffin phase. There are some shenanigans with maces and people collecting ribs, but he finally goes into the coffin. But of course, it's John's plan, so naturally it goes wrong. And while he manages to find Daisy, he doesn't find his way back out. Martin is again the real MVP here and covers the coffin in mysterious magical tape recorders, since they had been following John around like dogs for ages, so maybe it will work the other way around too. It does. Daisy and John find out of the coffin, and he finally has someone around who isn't an arsehole for no reason. Especially since Daisy doesn't really like her haunting god anymore after lying in a coffin for a few weeks and thinking her life over. Meanwhile, Basira is trying to get information out of Elias, who is mostly known for his manipulation and ability to talk his way out of things. Shockingly, he only uses her as a connection to the outside world while he is forced to sit in a prison cell that for some reason put him in quite loudly clanging chains. Basira and John are trying to stop an apocalypse ritual of the dark that apparently happens next to where Santa Claus lives, but mysteriously the emo people were already stopped by someone else. John thinks it's a good idea to look directly into a sun, and they manage to get a ride back home by the evil maze now Lady Helen. Martin finds out that John is now addicted to sucking the statements out of living people, and his assistants try to stage an intervention. It doesn't really work, so they try to get answers from Spider-Woman, Annabelle Kane, but she just philosophizes over free will and the kind of stuff you're forced to listen in your high school philosophy class to. Meanwhile, Peter tries to get Martin to trust him more by bringing in Simon Fairchild, a senior citizen that enjoys skydiving in the color blue for some reason, but Martin isn't very happy about it since Fairchild threatens to throw him off a roller coaster. John finds out that you can actually change your employment status in the archives by destroying your eyes, and immediately goes to his crush Martin so that they can romantically run away together. Martin declines, but Melanie finally sees her chance to stop sulking in every episode she's in and gets out her all. She apparently plans for her new girlfriend to take care of her after becoming blind, which is quite awkward since her new girlfriend turns out to be John's ex. Martin leaves a cryptic message for John, but no one's talking to him, so he has no idea what to do with it, until Elias, who by now just walked out of prison, leaves a tape of him killing Gertrude and keys that lead down to the hidden tunnels. John talks about it with Basira and Daisy, who finally turn up, and they find out that Elias is actually the founder of the Magnus Archives, Jonah Magnus, who somehow is able to jump bodies to stay young and fresh. The vampire killers that John managed to piss off in America show up, and Daisy gives in to the part of her that always wanted to be part of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she attacks them while John goes into the tunnels to search for his crush. Meanwhile, in the tunnels, Peter explains to Martin that they are going to the source of Elias' power, a Lord of the Wings-like tower called the Panopticon, where Elias' true body lays. If Martin kills it, he takes over the power and hopefully will be powerful enough to stop the new rising god of greenhouse gases. Elias shows up and tries to stop him, but Martin explains that he never really believed in Peter's plan and just acted like he did so he would leave John alone. Since Peter made a bet with Elias about Martin believing him, he now has to throw Martin into the realm of the lonely that seems to be a rather lovely beach. John shows up to save Martin, and with the power of love, he does and kills Peter. Afterwards, they hide in a safe house in Scotland, where Martin can watch some cows eat grass while John brings on the apocalypse. It seems like all of this has been planned by Elias all along, and he just waited for John to get marked by all 14 fears, because apparently the apocalypse is something that can only work as a group project where all fears work together. Season 5. The apocalypse has happened, and John and Martin still sit around in the safe house because what else are they supposed to do? John listens to some nostalgic tapes of his dead friends until Martin finally gets a grip and makes the plan to reverse the apocalypse by killing Elias, because that's how it works in video games. In the apocalypse, John has become that one friend that knows the answer to everything and rubs it under your nose constantly, and he explains that they need to cross several hellscapes of the other fears to get to the old boss. They meet several old acquaintances, and everyone is extremely respectful and friendly to John since they now more or less work for him, and because he can kill them with a dramatic speech. Then John kills several of them with a dramatic speech, and Martin is astonishingly blood-hungry about it. While wandering around, they find Daisy, who turned full werewolf woman and only thinks of hunting and banging her girlfriend. Unfortunately, Basira knows it isn't the real Daisy, so she kills her and goes off to find her own way to Elias. John and Martin play I Spy with My Little Eye and find some old museum that John can't see into, so they go up to it to find out what is going on. They meet Spider-Woman again there, together with a collector that has managed to keep the apocalypse away with a magical camera. They sleep a bit, but leave because John gets sick since his brain is too accustomed to apocalypse times. They reach the hellscape that is intended for Martin, where he has a pretty therapeutic talk with himself about relationships and how he might have to kill his new boyfriend. You know, typical relationship problems. Meanwhile, John kills the Maze Lady because she was a really crappy friend and her occasionally changing her entire personality was kind of annoying. They finally get to where Elias is hiding, but can't get in. They get kidnapped by the Resistance instead, who is led by John's ex and Melanie, who is still an asshole. This is the end so far. So I hoped I managed to bring everyone up to speed again about what was going on in the Magnus Archives so far. Obviously I left a lot of characters and plot points out, but if this video is well received I might think about making other videos of summarizing other key plot points, like the story of Hilltop Road. You can leave suggestions in the comments down below.